How many times have you checked your phone today? Not because it rang, not because it vibrated, just because you hoped something had changed. Maybe this time they replied. Maybe this time someone remembered you. Maybe this time the silence would finally end. So you unlock your phone. Nothing. A few minutes later, you do it again, then again. Without even realizing it, your hand reaches for your phone before your mind has made the decision. And slowly, your entire day begins to revolve around something that hasn't happened. One message, one notification, one tiny sign that someone, somewhere, is thinking about you. It sounds like a habit. But it isn't. Because you're not really checking your phone. You're checking for relief. You're checking for reassurance. You're checking for proof that you haven't been forgotten. And once you understand why waiting feels so powerful, you'll realize that your phone was never the real reason you couldn't find peace. The strange thing is, most of us aren't addicted to our phones. We're addicted to possibility. The possibility that this time, the message will finally arrive. The possibility that someone will choose us, remember us, need us, love us. And while we're waiting, our minds begin filling the silence. They're ignoring me. I said something wrong. They've lost interest. They've moved on. It's amazing how quickly the human mind can turn one silent moment into an entire story. But here's what makes it so exhausting. Every time you check your phone, and nothing has changed, your hope rises, then quietly falls, again, and again, and again, until you're no longer living the day that's actually happening. You're living inside the next notification, the next vibration, the next tiny possibility that someone else might decide how you feel today. And without realizing it, your peace has slowly become dependent on something you cannot control. Not because you're weak, not because you're needy, but because somewhere along the way, your heart learned to confuse waiting with love, to confuse uncertainty with hope. And that's a lesson that quietly steals more of our lives than we ever realize. After enough days, something begins to change. You stop checking your phone because you're expecting a message. You start checking it because you're afraid of what it means. If there isn't one, silence no longer feels neutral. It feels personal. 1 hour becomes, they must be upset. One evening becomes, they don't care anymore. One day becomes, I was never important to them. But notice what just happened. Nothing changed, except the story inside your mind. The phone stayed silent. The world kept moving. Yet somewhere between reality and your imagination, your peace quietly disappeared. That's the hidden cost of waiting for someone else to decide how valuable you feel. Little by little, you stop living in the present. Dinner becomes background noise. Music loses its beauty. Conversations drift past unnoticed, because one part of your mind is always somewhere else, waiting, listening, hoping. You aren't holding your phone anymore. Your phone is holding you, not with technology, but with expectation. And perhaps that's one of the loneliest feelings in the modern world. Being physically surrounded by life, while emotionally living inside a screen, waiting for someone else to tell you that you matter. What if the hardest part isn't waiting for a message? What if it's waiting for permission to feel okay? Somewhere along the way, many of us stopped believing that peace could come from within. Instead, we began searching for it in someone else's response, someone else's attention, someone else's choice. And every time they answered, we felt relieved, not because a message has magical power, but because, for a brief moment, we believed we were enough. Then the feeling disappeared, so we waited again. This is how emotional dependence quietly grows. Not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary ones. One notification, one scene, one delayed reply, one silent evening, until your happiness begins rising and falling with someone else's schedule, someone else's mood, someone else's priorities. But here's a gentle truth that your anxious mind rarely tells you. Someone can love you and still be busy. Someone can care deeply and still forget to reply. Someone can be overwhelmed without pulling away from you. Silence is not always rejection. Delay is not always distance, and another person's availability has never been a reliable measure of your worth. The moment you stop measuring yourself by how quickly someone responds, you begin taking back something precious, your peace. Because real peace doesn't arrive when the notification finally appears. It begins when your heart no longer needs one to believe that you matter. Healing doesn't begin the day your phone finally lights up. It begins the day your peace no longer depends on whether it does. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop loving or stop hoping. It simply means you stop handing the keys to your happiness to someone who never asked to hold them. Imagine waking up one morning, checking your phone, and smiling, whether there's a message or not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've finally stopped measuring your worth by someone else's attention. That kind of freedom doesn't happen all at once. It begins with very small moments. Leaving your phone in another room without feeling anxious, finishing a meal without checking for notifications, enjoying a sunset without wondering who hasn't texted back. These moments seem ordinary, but they quietly teach your heart something it may have forgotten. Life is still happening, right here, right now, not inside the next notification, not inside the next reply. The people who truly belong in your life will not love you more because you checked your phone every 5 minutes, and they will not love you less because you chose to live the moment in front of you. Perhaps the greatest message you've been waiting for was never going to arrive through a screen. Perhaps it has been quietly waiting inside you all along. If this message found you today, perhaps you've been waiting for more than just a reply. Perhaps you've been waiting to feel chosen, to feel remembered, to feel important. And maybe that's why the silence hurts so much. Not because your phone is quiet, but because somewhere deep inside, you're afraid that the silence is saying something about you. But it isn't. A delayed message cannot measure your worth. An unanswered text cannot define your value. And another person's attention was never meant to become the foundation of your peace. So tonight, before you reach for your phone one more time, pause, look around, take one slow breath, listen to the world that's happening outside the screen. The sky is still changing. The wind is still moving. Life is still unfolding. Even while you're waiting, don't let one notification become the only place where you believe happiness can arrive. Because one day, the message you've been waiting for will come, or perhaps it won't. But your life should never remain on hold while you wait for someone else to decide when you're allowed to feel okay. The greatest freedom isn't finally receiving the message. It's reaching the moment when you realize your heart no longer needs it to know that you are already enough.